Kate Mila Falcho, welcome to Irish Granny Helen and Nollaig, which is Happy Christmas in Irish. So Nollaig to everybody and welcome. And this is your little Christmas treat. I'm doing an extra video on our book. So this is our Christmas book, Marilyn, the real Marilyn Monroe. And I hope everybody enjoys that. And if that's not your cup of tea, on my Ask Your Irish Granny Substack, I have a little present for everybody too for Christmas Day. So let's get going here because I got company. So chapter 37, her last photos reveal her true strength. I found this to be a very interesting part of the story. It revealed, I feel, George Barris, the photographer, really knew her well. So let's get going. In the last 6 months, her image had evolved and was a far cry from the 1950s Marilyn. She looked really healthy. If you see all the pictures of her, and many of them are candid, she looks beautiful. She doesn't look dissipated. She looks healthier, rested, better than she did when she was making that movie, The Misfits. She seems happy. The Vogue guy who did the Vogue shoot, Bert Stern, said they were the best pictures he'd ever taken, and that she had an ethereal beauty. This was in June of 24th of the summer she died. I guess spoiler alert. Okay, hang on here. Let me get the quote I have. Okay, the Barris sessions happened on the beach. I showed you the picture the other day of her on the beach in that kind of heavy knit sweater. And then some of the other videos on the same shoot, she was wrapped in a towel. She didn't have a lot of makeup on. I don't think she had any makeup on. And she was in a bikini, actually. She looked very natural. Longtime Reno, Nevada-based photographer Dawn Dondero, who took pictures of a raft of celebrities and politicians and chronicled much of Marilyn's 1960 stay in the city during the filming of The Misfits, declared that Marilyn Monroe was the most photogenic person he ever dealt with. He said that even if he tried, he would have found it impossible to take a bad picture of the actress. No matter what was the angle or the lighting aspects, or regardless of the emotional events swirling around her, she always looked terrific on film. She seemed to feel under threat that summer. She was physically doing really, really well, and she seemed quite stable, but something was concerning her, not to make her an irrational person, but to have her a little bit on guard. She had locks put on her filing cabinet that she had. She had a special filing cabinet and she wanted it to be private, so she put locks on it. Larry Jordan, the author here, says that Peter Lawford lied about Marilyn Monroe, where she went and with whom, all the time. That Peter Lawford, it's hard to figure out what he was doing, what he was thinking, but he lied. He's considered as a source 100% unreliable, not just by Larry Jordan, but just not considered a reliable person. According to an article that was written on July 15th of 62, she went to visit the mother of Jean Harlow. It's so interesting. Jean Harlow and Thelma Todd both give off Marilyn Monroe vibes. There was something, and it's not just the hair. There was something else about them, and she felt very connected to them too. I think it's so interesting. She wanted to make a movie about Jean Harlow. She went to see her mother because she wanted to go visit her, and when she went, she found out that her mother had been dead since 1958, so she just missed being able to talk to her. But she kind of wanted family permission. She wanted to be respectful of her memory. there were lots of errors about Marilyn in books. Like this one article said she talked to her mother. She didn't talk to Jean Harlow's mother. She missed that opportunity. It's difficult to nail facts down. I don't know how Larry Jordan researched this book. The amount of information is overwhelming. He's put it in order. He's tied all the loose ends. He's double-checked and triple-checked things and separated fact from fiction. And it's still, even clarified, it's difficult to follow. Possibly, there's talk that Titanus Films of Rome had offered to take the movie Something's Gotta Give and keep Marilyn and Dean Martin and make it in Rome. The president of Titanus said it would be easier for Marilyn Monroe because Italian movie work does not begin till noon. Strasberg's were in Italy for the summer for that workshop that they were working on, and the question is, did they put Titanus up to this? Was this their way of weaseling themselves back into her life? She was still going back and forth on the phone with the AG. This had not ended. She worked with Barris to select photos from that beach photo session. He never published the ones that she rejected. Well, he didn't publish them for decades. The ones that she rejected, he respected her wishes. While working that day, Joe Jr. showed up at the house. This is Joe DiMaggio Jr. And she told George Barris, I'm very proud of my stepchildren. I don't want to be their mother. I know that. I'm their friend. She told Barris that marriage really wasn't on her mind. This was not something that she was pining for. She says, I'm all for a happy marriage. And then she had something kind of interesting to say, her sort of attitude about marriage. I tried on my marriages. She says, I don't blame my career. My marriages came first, or I would have made more pictures. Marriage has to be worked at from both sides, like a garden. Then she said, maybe that's why I'm interested in horticulture. And she told him absolutely for certain she is not interested in remarrying Joe DiMaggio. She did a Red Book interview on July of 62, and the interviewer complimented her body. She had really gotten super fit, and she said, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of okay, this is how she said it. He said she had a firm body, and she said, well, I'm proud of it, but I'm more proud of my firm character. It's better to be unhappy alone than unhappy with someone, and she refused to trash talk her exes. I really noticed that. She would not take the bait when journalists tried to get her to say snarky things, which they tried all the time. She said that her stepchildren were very precious to her. She said, I love them more than anyone in her life. She was open about her mental health and about the time she spent at Payne Whitney. She said, pain gave me a pain. She was glad she challenged the doctors who obviously had placed her there in error. And she was very clear about that. She said, I didn't need to be in a locked unit. And yes, I got upset because I didn't need to be in a locked unit. She was looking forward to becoming a marvelous character actress as she got older, like Marie Dressler, who really was a great actress. There are a lot of false and old rumors that she had had abortions in Mexico, and these are lies. People just did anything they could think of to make her a source of gossip. There's question about who started those lies. She was misquoted out of context, and there was a comment made about her mother. I don't remember this. This will be. The quote was that Monroe told George Barris, a woman must have to love a man with all her heart to have his child. I mean, especially when she's not married to him. And when a man leaves a woman when she tells him she's going to have his baby, when he doesn't marry her, that must hurt a woman very much deep down inside. So this was something she was saying about her mother. But there was a context. She was talking about her mother who got pregnant with Norma Jean, Marilyn, while being married to another man. And the lover abandoned Gladys when she got pregnant. People like to take that quote out of context and say she was talking about herself. No, when she made that comment, she was discussing the mess her mother was in, getting pregnant with her. Her autopsy, as much as it could, showed she'd had no abortions, and she hadn't recently had any kind of a pregnancy or a miscarriage. She didn't have her tubes tied, but she couldn't have had her tubes tied because that wasn't possible until the late 70s. Her gynecologist, which it shocks me they're talking about these things publicly, said she never even had one abortion, and those are ridiculous rumors. She had 2 miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy, and that's on record. Ralph Roberts was very critical of the many inaccuracies that were out there. People who knew her really well were just horrified by the things that were said about her, and then went into general circulation. Chapter 38, the last weekend, Cal Neva Lodge. And then this is such a complicated story, this story. So July 21st and 22nd of 1962, Marilyn went to Nevada. Cal Neva Lodge. Yeah, I think it's in Nevada. But there's a lot of misinformation written out there in very popular books that say she went the next week, the week right before she died. And that's not true. And there's a ton of evidence to the fact. So let's talk about it. In 1985, that book Goddess came out, and it made shocking allegations of her going on the 28th and 29th to the Cal Neva, and that she was drugged and abused and OD'd and saved by Lawford and Sinatra, and then Joe DiMaggio came to rescue her, and he was turned away. They wouldn't let him in to see her. This just elaborate, melodramatic, crazy story, and none of it is true. Joe DiMaggio was in New York City on July 28th playing baseball in a public game that was on record with the White Sox, and there's a photo on the front page of the sports section of the New York Times. He'd been at Harrah's with Mitzi Gaynor, well, not with her, but to see her show on the 25th. And he was definitely there because he got a standing ovation from the crowd for being there. Oh, look who's here, Joe DiMaggio. Please stand up. And then everybody gave him a standing ovation. There are photos of Marilyn there with Buddy Greco. He was a performer of some sort. He was there because he was contracted to be there on July 21st and 22nd, and there are photographs of her there sitting around the pool talking to him. She didn't accompany him. They just encountered each other at the pool. She wasn't there to see Sinatra perform because Sinatra wasn't there to perform. He had a sore throat and he wasn't performing. There's solid evidence that she was not at the Cal Neva Lodge the immediate weekend before her death, the 28th and 29th. The Los Angeles FBI got an assassination threat somehow, an anonymous threat against the AG. And it turns out this was connected to Jimmy Hoffa, the mob, was threatening. The hairdresser Julius Bergeston filled in for George Masters on this particular weekend and went with Marilyn to Tahoe. Imagine having a hairdresser travel with you. Mine would be terribly bored. And that person verifies it was the weekend of the 21st and the 22nd. She told him, why they were going is she was going to visit a friend. So he did her hair in the bathroom of the plane en route to Vegas for a Frank Sinatra opening. It was an overnight trip, he said. When we came home, she put something in my hand, said it was something to remember her by. It was $500. I almost passed out. I was making $65 a week. This is just how much he liked her because she was just so kind. He confirmed that Monroe took him to Lake Tahoe 2 weeks before her death, July 21st and 22nd. He said it was so she could visit a male friend. She had told me, anything you hear in this room should go in one ear and out the other. She was the most fabulous person I have ever met. I knew a lot, but I didn't know that she was in such deep trouble. She paid him $150 by check on July 26th. She also autographed a photograph for him, inscribed, Julius, it is memorable flying with you anytime, Marilyn. Lots of proof, lots of evidence. She got there, and then she discovered Joe DiMaggio was there. She was very upset. She said, my whole time there was spent trying to keep us from bumping into each other. She put all her energy into avoiding him. So Joe was real jealous of her time with Frank Sinatra, and Sinatra wasn't happy that Joe was there. And he said to somebody, why doesn't he just leave her the F alone? Why doesn't he just leave her? Somebody caught Joe on the hill above the pool. There was a pool that was surrounded by rises, and he was up on the hill staring at her from this hill. She complained she felt like a prisoner that weekend. He may not have known that she was going to be there, but he had just become part owner of the lodge. He bought it because he was mad at Sinatra. These people are like children. I'm sorry. So Joe was a friend and a golf buddy of Sam Giancana. And he became partner, a full-time golf partner of his. They hung out together quite a bit. Giancana would get Joe women, and he gave him money, and Joe dated Giancana's girlfriend Phyllis McGuire for a while, and he also dated Judith Campbell. That name should ring a bell. He had been involved with the mob since he was in the baseball, his baseball days. If Marilyn knew that Joe was fronting for the mob at Cal Neva, she would have realized that it could put her in great peril because she was dating Xiii, the AG. And this whole situation made everybody nervous. If she had known fully what was going on, she would have been really nervous. Giancana was nervous. Hoffa's buddies were nervous. The government was nervous because of the AG. The AGs and his family were nervous. Everybody, so many fingers could be pointed in so many directions. It's wild. It's crazy. Joe was shockingly involved with the mob and said that it paid because it attracted patrons to the lodge. Frank Costello created a retirement trust fund and made deposits over time. And Joe visited one of Costello's clubs, and every time Joe visited one of his clubs, he'd make another deposit. So he was kind of paying him, but not putting cash in his hand. He was doing a kind of an roundabout, kind of hide it, by putting the money in a trust fund every time Joe showed up at the club. He got over $1 million doing this. He had bad timing to drop by Albert Anastasius. He went to see him, and Anastasia was shot that same day, later that day. And the police questioned Joe, and he had to pretend he had no idea. He denied knowing anything about the whole situation, and he denied knowing men that he had drinks with on a regular basis. He had to pretend he didn't know them because the cops were dragging him into this street shooting. He also got paid for going to clubs for Skinny D'Amato. That's a great name. Skinny D'Amato. He once had, he once got handed hundreds of thousands of dollars cash in dirty money to hide in his house for the mob, to keep it away from the IRS. Oh my God. He turned a blind eye to rampant criminality, and Marilyn would have hated this, and that may be really why she divorced him. She saw what he was like. He was an opportunist. Why did the Lawfords coax her to come to the resort that weekend? She didn't want to go, but she told Ralph Roberts, her good friend, that Pat Lawford persuaded her to go. So they did talk her into it. Peter Lawford told her that the AG would be there at Sinatra's, and to tempt her like bait. She didn't know that there was bad blood between Sinatra and the AG. She didn't know any of this. And the AG was in Nevada. He was there already. He wasn't in Washington, D.C. He was in Nevada to look at a bomb test, one of those nuclear bomb tests. But they lied to her, and lies were told about her. She wasn't there because she was being romantic with Sinatra. They were good friends, which is kind of weird because he was not very nice to her, but they were friends. This whole thing was set up, and the Lawfords were involved in setting it up to get her there because Sam Giancana wanted to talk to her. And he wanted to talk to her about a scheme he had. He was going to make her an offer she couldn't refuse. So this lodge was a nice secluded spot. It was private. Robert Stack was a good friend of the family from outside Boston. JFK had been his roommate. And in 1986, he told people that both brothers entertained Marilyn at the Cal Neva. Stack's dad was an ad man for Quaker Oats. It's just the plot thickens. Like the oatmeal, the plot thickens. Stack's father was an ad man for Quaker Oats. He had 14 acres close to Cal Neva, close to the lodge. So Robert Stack, that was convenient because of the brothers would often go there, so he could go there too. He was an old roommate, just all these weird connections. He said, I don't like to make money from other people's problems and miseries, and that's why he didn't include this story in his book that he wrote. But according to the FBI files on Frank Sinatra, Sam Giancana reportedly told his brother that he'd been present one time at a slumber party at Cal Neva involving both brothers. Those two men, he said, had sex with prostitutes, sometimes two or more at a time, in bathtubs, hallways, closets, on floors, almost everywhere but the bed. This presumably was before the election and giving them both positions, and before waging war against the mob. Otherwise, they would have run the risk of being filmed doing all this stuff. If the scenario of the two brothers being present during escapades like that seems implausible, consider the case of 19-year-old White House intern Mimi Birdsket Alfred. White House press aide Barbara Gamarakian, they have such hard names, I'm sorry, described Mimi as someone who could not type, had no skills, who obviously couldn't perform any function at all, and yet she worked in the press office. The comments were leaked by a JFK library activist in 2003 and exploded on the press. Only later did Mimi tell her story about being completely innocent, being on the staff at the White House, being seduced by the older brother, and he tried to get her to perform with, where do I have this written down? Here we go, Dave Powers, certain acts at a pool while being watched. I'm trying to be careful about what I say here. She said that on another occasion, when the third third brother, the younger one, was in the room with both of them. She said, I could see this mischievous look come into the oldest brother's eyes. Mimi, why don't you take care of my baby brother? He could stand a little relaxation. You've got to be kidding me, she said. Absolutely not, Mr. Nice, huh? Anyway, congressional hearings and wiretaps show that the mob leaned on Sinatra to influence the older brother in his professional capacity. And one of the mob guys wanted to hit Sinatra for not producing. So they were leaning on Sinatra to make use of his connection to the brothers, and he wasn't getting enough out of them, and so they wanted to put a hit out on Sinatra. Giancana wanted to talk to Marilyn. Pat Lawford wanted Marilyn along as camouflage for her agenda. She left a big family to do with Jackie and the Shrivers and John Glenn and his family and all, you know, just all these extended family peoples. Her agenda was to give okay, so this is complicated. Hang on a second, I want to get it right. Her agenda was to get Peter the family okay, to give him the okay from the family, that it was now his job to resolve the money dispute between Old Joe and the mob. Old Joe couldn't talk anymore because of his stroke. So her job was to go out there and tell Peter, who was there because, you know, Rat Pack mob money, your family says it's your job now to do this, to negotiate this money situation. Joe was a silent partner in the resort. Old Joe. Too many Joes in this story. Giancana demanded that he negotiate with the AG, but AG refused. They despised each other. Okay, here's a little background about Sam Giancana. And here's his picture. A thoroughly unappetizing looking character. And I'm going to read this because I just thought it was very interesting background. He started out as Al Capone's driver, and he ended up being his successor. He was suspected of having ordered over 200 murders. His grisly trademark was having people hung up on meat hooks. He'd been arrested at least 70 times and was referred to as the godfather of the American mafia. A psychologist who interviewed Giancana during his selective service physical examination during World War II classified the gangster as a constitutional psychopath who showed strong antisocial trends. As a result, Giancana received 4F status and was disqualified from military service. He profited from the war proving the diagnosis correct. He profited from the war on the home front, making a fortune manufacturing counterfeit ration stamps. By the end of the war, the Giancana family had moved from the city to a house in the affluent Chicago suburb of Oak Park. By 55, he controlled gambling and prostitution, narcotics trafficking, and other illegal enterprises in his hometown. Under his leadership, the Chicago Mafia grew from a relatively small-scale racket to a full-fledged criminal enterprise. He later told an agent for the FBI that he owned not only Chicago, but Miami and Los Angeles as well. So this is the one who wants a private meeting with Marilyn Monroe. Oh my God, I'd be sick. So let's see here. Lawford was sent in the AG's place because AG refused to go. Bonanno, this other mafia guy, who was the model, by the way, for Michael Corleone in The Godfather, he said that Peter was often used as a go-between. But the mob didn't trust him. Nobody trusted him. Even the author of this book said he's completely unreliable. Sinatra hated him. Pat rushed there to be the buffer So she left the party to give Peter the go-ahead, but also to try to ameliorate stress between all these people. And this is all documented in FBI documents, by the way, so it's not a mystery. Marilyn was a pawn for the mob and for the Lawfords, and she thought her friend Sinatra was inviting her to relax and meet up with the AG. That wasn't it at all. Judith Campbell has extensive proof. She was often a messenger between the older brother and Giancana. She was a courier. She got Giancana to meet with, I'm sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting, to meet with the older brother about the Bay of Pigs. The FBI knew about this. So, Giancana, huh? She later learned that it was the older brother greenlighting the mob to kill Castro, and originally this was cooked up by the mob and the CIA. This is all allegedly, these are the stories. Apparently there's documentation. I don't know. The Attorney General told intelligence, like the CIA, next time let the Attorney General's office know what's going on before it happens. He personally was involved in a plot against Castro, the plot to kill Castro. And this came out in the 70s, thanks to the Church Committee. And the FBI told Kissinger about it. The older brother knew that Hoover watched him 24/7, and he didn't care. The same with the AG. They both knew this, but they were really reckless. They took a lot of chances. It's kind of puzzling. In '64, Secret Service recorded a secret meeting on the tarmac near a private plane between Giancana and the AG. No longer the AG at the time, but the AG. They also met in Florida, and there's proof. The Secret Service has the proof. So to understand Marilyn's situation at this moment, this delicate situation, you have to know about the family from outside Boston and the mob. Joe Sr. was a ruthless tycoon. Now, I always thought he was a rum runner, a bootlegger, and low-level criminality. I didn't think it was any big deal, but wait till you hear. He was a bootlegger, but he took that money and invested in Hollywood. He was fired by Roosevelt from London. He was the American ambassador. He was fired because of his anti-communist, anti-Semitic viewpoints in the world. He was praising Hitler as a substitute, an alternative to, all this other stuff. And he called Hitler a welcome solution. The Nazi ambassador to, I'm not sure if it was, must have been England, called Joe Germany's best friend in London. He's best described as avaricious, how his company, the RKO company, the movie company, got the Pantages chain in August of '29 as an example. He set up fake accusations against Alexander Pantages. He staged the situation. So what happened here is a lie. It happened. It really happened, that visually you would see this, but the story behind it was a complete lie. So a girl that he hired went with ripped clothes and ran screaming through the theater, through the lobby of the Pantages Theater, and then accused Pantages, Alexander, the owner. And they bought off the judge, and Pantages was found guilty and given 50 years. But he was given a new trial for whatever reason and was acquitted, but by that time he was bankrupt, trying to defend himself. And in the meantime, Joe Sr. bought the Pantages chain for very, very cheap because the owner was in jail under false allegations to that girl that Joe Sr. set up. The young woman told a lawyer that Joe Sr. had promised to make her a star. She was found dead by cyanide, and with her last breath, she said that Joe Sr. paid her $10,000 to frame Pantages. FDR got Joe to be the bag man for illegal campaign donations. So there's nobody whose hands are clean. This is shocking to me. I didn't think I could be shocked. I thought there were some people who might have integrity. I thought FDR was rich, but apparently there's never enough. And he got Joe Sr. to get illegal campaign donations, and Joe got the mob involved. FDR made him the chairperson of the Securities and Exchange Commission as a thank you. In 1938, he became ambassador, but that was a disaster because of Hitler. And because he was an appeaser of Hitler, Roosevelt fired him and described Joe as one of the most evil, disgusting men I've ever known. Harry Truman said he was as big a crook as we've got anywhere in this country. When Fortune magazine published its first list of the richest people in the United States, it placed Joe in the 200 to 400 million group. This would be close to almost 3.5 billion today, meaning he was somewhere between the 9th and 16th richest person in the United States. The FBI knew about him and all his fooling around, but he ingratiated himself with Hoover. And I wrote, how? It doesn't say. They've been described, Hoover and Joe Sr. were described as two dancers doing the paso doble. Hoover he appeased Joe to keep his job, and he hated and didn't trust him. And he was more than happy, Hoover was, to set up surveillance on the brothers. As Taylor Branch reported, during World War II, FBI agents watching a Danish reporter named Inga Arvad, who was suspected as a spy because she'd known Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, and other top Nazis, had discovered that she was having an affair with the older brother, then a Navy lieutenant. Acting on FBI accusations, the Navy had punished him with a transfer, and Hoover had denied him a written absolution from suspicion of disloyalty, refusing even personal appeals from the ambassador, Old Joe. Afterwards, when the lieutenant continued the affair, FBI agents had bugged their trysts to obtain tape recordings of Navy talk mixed with pillow talk. He was recklessly indiscreet. Okay, let's summarize. While he was a lieutenant in the Navy, he was having, we'll call it an affair, with a woman who was a top Nazi spy. And even when it was revealed, he kept doing it. His father tried to buy the Navy off. The Navy punished the son, but he still kept it up. I guess money can buy you love. Okay. After Joe Sr.'s stroke, Hoover was more confrontational with the brothers, which indicates that he was a little worried about the old guy, being what he could do to him. Goldwater said that the AG found out about old Joe, and the mob, and it just about killed him. Joe was crafty at hiding money and not paying taxes. Who does he remind you of? He helped a gambler who owned the Cal Neva originally, called Wingy Grober, with his taxes, and he ended up owning a large part of the lodge. He kind of finagled his way into it. Then he made a deal with Sinatra, helped the campaign for my son, get money from the mob, and get celebrity support. And when my son wins, he'll sell his share of the lodge. Joe would sell his share of the lodge to Sinatra for really cheap. And I guess it was just a money maker. Joe also met with Giancana to help, like the Chicago mob and the Daily Democratic Machine. Old Joe was seen at a New York. I did an abbreviation and I can't tell if it's a NV or an NY. Well, it doesn't matter. He was seen at a restaurant with some of the biggest mafia kingpins, a bunch of them at this restaurant. Pretty sure it was New York. He promised that when his son was elected, he'd overthrow Castro and give gambling back to the mob, and there'd be no government interference. This is just unbelievable. In 2000, there was an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes. Tina Sinatra, the daughter of Frank, confirmed that her father acted as a facilitator to assist old Joe in convincing the gangsters to help deliver the vote for his son in the crucial West Virginia primary in May of '60. Sinatra was chosen for the task because old Joe knew that my dad had access to Sam Giancana, she said unflinchingly on camera. On June 13th, 1960, the very day the Sun won the Democratic nomination in LA, a small news item appeared on the entertainment pages of the U.S. newspapers stating that Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin had applied to buy a majority stake in the Cal Neva Resort. What a coincidence. So co-owners were Old Joe and Giancana. And the front men for Giancana were Sinatra and Dean Martin and two other mob associates, and together that was 57%. Money from the lodge was flown to Chicago for Giancana on Frank Sinatra's plane. Dean Martin bailed out of the deal. He wanted no part of it. You get this impression of Dean Martin that he was a cut above as far as integrity. And there's more coming up. And it's very interesting. The mob resorted to fraud to swing the election. Hoffa and Carlos Marcello in New Orleans refused to cooperate because they hated the younger brother who became AG. Santo Traficante helped in Florida because Cuba. So the Sun won by 0.1% thanks to the Chicago mob. The DOJ later heard tapes and verified that, yes, there was fraud, and this is what the fraud was. The son was not loyal to his father's promises, which was a fatal mistake to betray them. This is a hint of what happened. If you remember, Deborah and I covered that whole topic, that assassination, and that was the answer. It was mob. He resisted making his brother AG, but his daddy made him do it. At first, the mob thought, good, this will keep the FBI off of us. And they were shocked when the AG began anti-mob crusade and all the mob convictions. In 1960, there were 30 mob convictions, and in 63, 288. So Giancana lost face, and he blamed Sinatra. The AG crusade against the mob was not about morality. It was to eliminate traces of the dirty tricks and cover up the family scandals, especially around the campaign. This was often the AG's job. He was the cleaner-upper. Giancana saw only that wily old bastard Joe, and he got the AG to sic the FBI to destroy all to whom Joe got the AG to sic the FBI on to destroy all who had offended or who owed favors to the family, and to erase all the markers that they had, and to keep everybody quiet. It was brilliant, said Giancana. Just effing brilliant. They thought they had the goods on Hoover and therefore were safe from the FBI. Joe sent proof Joe Sr., sent proof that they were in the crosshairs of a huge federal crackdown that the AG was pushing Hoover into. So they weren't safe. They had the goods on Hoover. I didn't quite say what those goods were, but I think we all know what what the gossip is. And they thought that kept them safe, and it didn't. They found out that there had to be a snitch in their midst. Because they got this info, they erroneously thought from the snitch, that everything was good. They thought that the guy at the top, the son, the winner of the campaign, trying to avoid names, he had their back, but he didn't have their back. He was not true to the promises his father made. He didn't tell them about the wiretaps that he had on them. They just knew that Hoover was listening to them. The mob was fully aware that Hoover had them surveilled. They didn't know that the brothers had him surveilled as well. Let's see here. Okay. In 1959, the AG, before he was AG, was on the Senate committee. Hoffa and Giancana were wiretapping him because of what he was involved in, the Senate work. And these wiretaps that the mob set were placed by Otash and Bernie Spindle, who later became involved with placing taps in Maryland's environs. When he became AG, Giancana got them, with the CIA's help, to blanket the brothers with surveillance. I mean, just, let's see if I understand what's going on here. The family from outside Boston is in bed with the mob. Sinatra, Lawford, all those guys in bed with the mob. Joe DiMaggio in bed with the mob. And Hoffa in bed with the mob. And the brothers and their family are playing everybody against each other. And everybody knows that because everybody is surveilling everybody, not to mention that the CIA is also surveilling all these people too. It is crazy. It's like a circular firing squad. Let's see. So the CIA is blanketing the brothers with surveillance and finding out minute by minute what they're doing every minute and with whom. Robert Mayhew, whose business was what became the model for the show, The Mission Impossible, on television, he was an associate of Howard Hughes. And in 1961, the CIA used him as a liaison with the mob, especially Giancana and his plot on Castro, Operation Mongoose, the CIA's plan. Giancana had to assemble a team of detectives. So if this sounds confusing, it's because you've got this overlap of official people and criminal people, the underworld, working hand in hand. Like the mob was working with the CIA. The CIA was working with the mob, and they were both spying on each other. Also, the Attorney General had the FBI ramp up its spying on Sinatra and the Cal Neva Lodge. The FBI already was surveilling them because of Joe Sr. The FBI was surveilling the family from outside Boston everywhere they went, and they weren't fully aware of it. And they were afraid that Joe Sr. was dealing with the mob, and their surveillance confirmed it. The FBI thought that he was just getting money from Hoffa, although that wasn't true. The money was coming directly from the mob. Although Hoffa and the mob, it's crazy. Also, D'Amato, remember Skinny D'Amato? He was running prostitution ring, flown in from San Francisco to the lodge, and it was so overt that you could just arrange for it at the front door, the front desk when you checked in. So Cal Neva is expanding was opening up its season to be a longer season, and it was adding to its facilities. Rudden, the lawyer, now I think if I remember correctly, I mean, this is quite a cast of characters. I believe Rudden is the lawyer who's the brother-in-law of Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist. He told the FBI that they would get a loan of $4 million from the Teamsters, and told them that it's not mob money, it's just business. But the FBI found out that Hoffa had rejected the loan because he hated the source of the money, the family from outside Boston. Giancana, who was a silent partner, had to fork over the money, and he was angry because he didn't want the profits to go to the family. The ones outside Boston. He felt that they owed him because of the election, and for money owed for the work that he'd done on the election, and also for the expansion of the lodge. So he was really simmering in this anger and resentment. Judith Campbell testified that she couriered satchels with $250,000 cash from the older brother to Giancana. Giancana was not satisfied. He said that Giancana's and, well, what he wasn't satisfied with that money. So what he did was he made everybody pay Sinatra more for Sinatra, but Sinatra was giving it to Giancana. So Giancana's share went from 25% to 50%. This is the craziest story. I don't have a brain for this kind of criminality. I can't keep track of this much maneuvering. Old Joe wasn't able to talk, and the older brother was refusing to talk, and he was avoiding Giancana, and he was avoiding Judith and Marilyn by this point. So Giancana sent AG a demand for a summit at Cal Neva on July 21st to the 22nd. And so obviously he had blackmail dirt on them to be able to force their hands. So the wiretap revealed Giancana saying, this is a quote from the wiretap tapes. Sam says, I'm going to get my money out and I'm still going to own half the joint. Hoover and the FBI were also squeezing the brothers. They sent a memo to the Attorney General about the family's involvement with the mob and the Cal Neva Lodge. And Hoover basically said, I know what you're doing, taunting them, and included old Joe in this accusation. He told the AG that the wiretap of Giancana said that he made donations to the campaign of the older brother, but was not getting his money's worth. So, you know, Hoover knew the whole entire story. The FBI knew exactly what was going on. And revealing any of this would have been disastrous for that family, for those brothers. It would have just been utterly disastrous. July 21st and 22nd, Giancana's agenda was to straighten out the money and the holdings of the ownership of the lodge with the people in Boston, and to get Marilyn Monroe to help blackmail the brothers. So he guilted her and the Lawfords on, he greeted her and the Lawfords on their arrival. It was all palsy-walsy, and it was actually number one on his black book, agenda was to soften her up. It was discovered later, that Giancana being number one on the hit list of, not the hit list, but like the number one bad mob guy that the government was keeping an eye on, and that they were banned from involvement in business in Nevada. This came back to haunt him because people saw him there greeting her. And because of that, Sinatra was forced by the Gaming Commission to sell the lodge. So eventually it all backfired, but it took too long. John Jacobson was a college student with a summer job at the lodge. He was a dishwasher and a busboy. And he said Giancana was often there, usually with Sinatra. He said, I was surprised that he was there so openly because he knew the rules that the mobsters were not supposed to be there in Nevada. So he was an artist, he was a student, and he was an art student, and he drew sketches. And he also saved his paychecks and matchbooks to prove, because he knew someday this would be a good story. Pat Lawford was horrified to encounter and be seen with Giancana. She didn't know he was going to be there. And she told Peter Lawford that we need to leave ASAP. Marilyn said that she couldn't leave, that she was tired and she was airsick. She was not getting back on an airplane. She went to the pool to greet Sinatra, and that's where she met Buddy Greco, where those pictures are from. And he said she was bubbly. She was full of vim and vigor and in a good mood and friendly. Not depressed, not at her wit's end, not haggard. When she came to the club that evening to see my show, she was the total opposite. You never knew which Marilyn you were going to see. She was no longer friendly and bubbly. Something had happened. In the space of 12 hours, she went from this wonderful, incredible woman to kind of shook up. She went at the start of the weekend in great spirits, but later became out of sorts. And why? There's good reason. It had nothing to do with alcohol or drugs, and we're going to find out now why. It's because Sinatra had a private chat with her. Gianni Russo, a 19-year-old, was the eyes and ears for Frank Costello, another mobster. He was a braggart, but he was also extremely knowledgeable about the mob, and so he was 19 at the time, but then he talked about it as an adult. He overheard a lot of things because he was young and nobody paid attention to him. And he bragged that he had once shot a guy in self-defense, and actually the story is true. He really did. So he overheard the plan to blackmail and extort the brothers. He overheard it. Hoffa has wiretap transcripts that confirm that they were going to use Marilyn to blackmail the brothers. The plan was to get her to agree to a secret film of her and the AG in private, and to use this against the AG. This has been confirmed by the feds, former law enforcement, and the son of the mobster that was there. They needed video proof. All they had was audio tapes. They really needed video proof to really clinch the deal. Giancana wanted to counteract the brothers' very, very positive image in the media and how they suppressed media about them being with Marilyn. He was tired of that, them getting away with this kind of stuff. And they just had a terrible time trying to get into film, get close enough to them to film because of all of the security around them. Marilyn was their best choice. She was a sex symbol and a star, would be scandalous, and then everybody saw her singing that happy birthday song. I mean, that was a hint. So she would not be exposed, they told her, because the AG wouldn't let it be shown. She would do it, but nobody would know about it because they would secretly tell him that they had it. They'd let him see what they had, and he'd keep it quiet too. Everybody would keep it quiet. She could pretend to be a victim of secret filming, if that's what she wanted to get her to cooperate. She went ballistic at Sinatra. See, Sinatra's the one who's telling her this. Rumors were that she had fun that night and got carried out drunk. And it's pretty unreliable witnesses because they all had a stake in the story. Dorothy Kilgallen reported on this weeks later and said, a maid found Marilyn unconscious on the floor of her room. She was revived, but passed out cold in view of several hundred guests in the lodge. She was then carried out and flown to San Francisco in Frank Sinatra's private plane. But this is information she got through sources, and the sources were set up. She hinted about alcohol. She hinted about pills, about wild partying. But people talked to her that night, Marilyn, at dinner, and people had absolutely normal conversations with her. Nobody, not in this web of deception, ordinary people that talked to her said she was fine. It was just a big setup to blame all of this, so that they think it's so nefarious, actually, that these rumors served to explain what happened to her in the end, too. Kilgallen called it what happened to her at Cal Neva Lodge, the story of her being in such bad shape and having to be revived and flown out, that it was an attempted self-harm. But none of this is true. Kilgallen went on to present many questions about details of the weekend, but her questions were never pursued by law enforcement or journalists, especially after the fact, after Marilyn died. Nobody ever looked into any of this. And years later, Peter Lawford made some false accusations about Marilyn. He blamed her firing, but he never knew that she had been rehired. He said, yeah, she was in bad shape, but that's why she got fired from the studio. So what do you expect? He didn't know they'd hired her back. Cheap, weak, sneak, and freak was Frank Sinatra's description of Peter. I'm going to say that again because it's too good. Cheap, weak, sneak, and freak. Judith Campbell said, I don't have an ounce of respect for Peter Lawford. I think he's an ass. He makes the best flunky in the world because it's important to Peter to be with important people. He'll sacrifice himself, take a tremendous amount of punishment just to be there. Let's see here. Okay, this is a really long chapter, so I'm going to stop. A little temptation for the coming weekend. So I hope you are enjoying this. This has been a very confusing, I realize it's a very confusing chapter because these people are in a web of deception and corruption and pathology. It's just really terrible, and it's hard to keep track. I don't know. I don't think they even knew who their friends were or who their enemies were. It's just terrible. But Marilyn was in the middle of a very dangerous situation, and she had no idea. She didn't know. So, something cheery to think about on Christmas. Nollaig. I hope you guys have a lovely Christmas, and I'll be back at the end of the week for the next chapter. That's the end of video number 13. Thanks for watching. Slán go bhfuil. Slán.